So as we went to press with the program, details were coming in from these young innovators about precisely what they're doing. And as you know, when you're early career or bridging your student days and your early career, things happen fast. So I want to give, first and foremost, our panelists a chance to introduce themselves in their own words and update what may be appearing in the program so that you have a more accurate sense of who they are and what they are not only doing but about to do in their remarkable work. The work that you have arrayed here spans educational innovations, innovation in the energy sector, and innovations in the biomedical sector. We really do have a nice spread, and also students from undergraduate perspectives to master's degree, postgraduate. So we have kind of a ladder represented, if you will, of young people moving out of the classroom into the world. Get ready for them. Are you ready? Do you feel ready? All right. I mean, I tend to rail against this pattern I see in many United Nations events and elsewhere where we put the youth together at the end, right? It happens a lot in conferences. And actually, our thought with this was that there is no category youth that really captures the different stages here. We're going to be hearing from them. And I'll begin actually maybe with Lydia, if you don't mind, and we can work our way down the line. And I'll just let each of these folks give you a brief update on who they are, what they're doing, and where they're heading or hope to be heading next in their work before we begin with the questions and answers. Be thinking as you listen to these intros of what you'd like to ask these folks, because we will facilitate that too. My co-host, Jose Alfaro, and I, who leads a Sustainability Without Borders group in the School for Environment and Sustainability. I'm an anthropologist at the School for Environment and Sustainability, and we are both fiercely interested in experiential learning, both for the experience and for the learning. And so you'll hear that in the panel tonight as well, that emphasis. Lydia, tell us about yourself.
So good afternoon. My name is Lydia Mensa. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in material science and engineering. I'm originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I grew up in a Ghanaian household, so I'm a first-generation American. And currently, my work is focused in polymers for drug delivery, but my interests also lie in STEM education and outreach, specifically for K through 12 minority youth.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mihir Sheth. I grew up in India, trained as an electrical engineer at Michigan, and I'm currently working at a company called Sisu Global Health as the first employee that Professor Sienko kindly introduced the company for me. So she's done a lot of that work. I appreciate that. And so we make medical devices and have commercialized the Hemofuse. Currently is being sold in Kenya, which is really exciting. And in the future, well, we're looking at expanding and seeing how else we can bring more technology to market.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Courtright. I grew up half in Washington State, half in Tanzania. After kind of wandering around for a few years after university, I moved back to East Africa, and I've been working in Uganda and the Central African Republic for the last 2 years, working for an Eritrean solar company by the name of Aptec Africa. They work in very, frontier countries, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Sierra Leone, and provide access to solar in some of the most difficult places. And they have made a successful business out of very small loans from family members. They've made a multi-million-dollar international business, two Eritrean brothers in Juba. So one of the proudest things in my life is to be able to work for a company like them, and I'm here now doing my master's in sustainable systems, focusing on renewable energy at seas. So I've got 2 years of that, and then I plan to move back to East Africa to continue working in the sector of the transition to renewable energies.
Hello. My name is Roland Amatefio. I grew up partially in Ghana and then in Evanston, Illinois, north side of Chicago. I am a senior here at U of M, studying environmental science with a focus in urban planning. And over the last year, helped co-found the 5 North Project with Madeline, which is a nonprofit that is striving to decrease the digital divide and provide computers as a resource for students in Ghana. So we had a project this last summer and were able to donate over 500 computers to 25 schools in Ghana this summer. In addition, we're writing a case study to try to talk a little bit about our project and help people kind of see how these types of things are done and trying to help replicate those things in the future.
Hi everyone, I'm Madeline Carter. I'm a senior here at U of M studying sociology, and as Roland explained, I'm also a co-founder of the 5 North Project.
So let me jump in, Rebecca. I'm going to try to moderate a little bit here, because one thing that amazes me about these folks right here is that how humble they are. You didn't hear very many numbers out of them, although Roland, thank you for pointing out how many schools you worked in. And I used to remember when I was younger, the people who were changing the world looked a lot older, and now they keep getting younger and younger and younger. I don't know, maybe it's just I'm getting old. But people used to tell me, oh, you guys are the future. And I want to say to us here that these guys are not the future, these guys are the present. I want to ask Tom, for example, how many people have solar panels or access to energy because of the company you worked with?
AppTech Africa does both solar and solar water pumping. I think the latest estimate is they've provided access to lighting to around 15,000 people and access to clean water to around 50,000 people.
And this is in what countries again?
This is in South Sudan, Central African Republic, and Sierra Leone.
Civil War, and Ebola, am I correct?
They have some difficulties.
They've had some pretty hard times that they've gone through. Mayor, I wanted to know more about your medical device. What does it do? I heard hemo something. I know that has to do something with blood. What is that about?
Yeah, so the Hemofuse, it's a blood transfusion device that if a patient has internal bleeding, the device can be used to suction that blood from the patient. It filters it and cleans it, and then makes it available for the surgeon to immediately retransfuse it to the patient within the same surgery.
So the circular economy of blood is what you're working on. Okay,
yes,
great.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's since it's since it's the patient's own blood, there's no cross matching that's needed to be done, and it's fresh blood as well, which is significantly better than something that's in the bank because it hasn't had time to degrade.
And how many hospitals are using this device now?
Right now, more than 20 hospitals across Kenya, from the top private hospitals to public hospitals to mission hospitals. Yeah.
Do you have an estimate of how many patients have used the device?
So we have so we've trained over 800 clinicians at this point. But the number of patients that have used it is, if I have to calculate,
Put him on the spot.
yeah. I don't think I can give a confident answer right now.
Would you say is more than one per clinician?
No. So
Okay.
So the device has just started being sold this year, so it's not more than one per clinician yet.
Perfect.
Yet.
Great. Thank you. Amazing. Lydia, I'm probably most familiar with your work with SWE. I didn't hear much about that, but can you tell the public what those camps in Liberia are about?
So SWE stands for Society of Women Engineers. A little more than 5 years ago, a group of women from SWE U of M and a group of women from University of Liberia met in Liberia through a grant that was funded through a professor at University of Michigan. And from that first get-together, it blossomed into LSWE, which is Liberia Society of Women Engineers. And so from that partnership, University of Michigan and University of Liberia women engineers have gotten together to host a STEM leadership and engineering camp for over 5 years now. And it's been a fruitful and very informative experience.
So big shout out to Aline Cotel, who's in the public and helped
Right
you guys do that. How many female engineers have gone through your camps?
Oh, that's a lot. So this year we had over 40 in our camp, and so multiply that by 5, so a lot. And then even just from that, the women that they encounter after we leave as well, because we do host a camp for just 2 weeks, but the purpose of the camp is almost like a training ground. So for the first 2 weeks we have this camp in Liberia, we work together in partnership. And so these experiments that we do, these lessons that we teach, we set it up in a way that while we teach them to the UL students, then they, after we leave, go into their communities and also teach other budding female engineers at their university, at other university campuses, as well as high school women as well.
Fantastic.
I love the domino effect. And Jose's an engineer, I'm an anthropologist, so I want to segue to some questions about, less about numbers and more about the experience, the feelings, the actual moments that have been most memorable for some of you on your journeys, if we could. Because I think those two things are connected. I think the way that we experience and remember and live something fully in the moment can then translate into the kind of reach and impact that we're describing. So I wonder if we could bring it back down to this end of the table. I know that the two of you are creating learning tools now about your own project. And those are digital tools. They're responsibly designed. This case is going to be something that a girl in Ghana can pull up on her cell phone and read about. Am I right? But do you all have a memory of learning yourselves where something went off, like a light bulb went off for you and it just suddenly became clear what you might be able to do when you were here at Michigan or in the field or anywhere? Like, do you remember a moment of learning where it was like, oh man, I see the dots connecting, I'm going to go with that?
I think for me, my moment actually wasn't when I was in the classroom. It was when I was kind of feeling like my classes.
I know,
Yeah.
right? Uh-oh.
It was when I was feeling like my classes, I was kind of feeling like I couldn't get as much out of them as I wanted, and I actually wanted to like take action and use some of the things that I was learning. And I felt like some of my skills like could be useful in that way. So I don't think it was a moment when I was in a class or anything that really sparked that for me, but more just when I was kind of like sitting with myself and just thinking about what I could do and realizing that I could just go for it and do it.
That is such an interesting answer in terms of reflection and time alone. Not what I expected, super, super useful to think with. Really interesting. Roland.
Yeah, I think for me, the big moment was while we were in Ghana this summer, working with the schools and distributing computers. Something that I saw a lot of was there was a lot of joy when it came to valuing education. So a lot of the students and parents and administrators that were there, they just really had a passion and a lot of joy, like I said, trying to provide these resources for their students. And I think there's some times where, for me, when I'm in classes and just studying by myself and trying to get decent grades and pass my classes and things like that, I kind of get bogged down and don't realize how much privilege I do have being here. So I think for me, realizing that education is a privilege and it's something that should be a right, but unfortunately isn't at this point. And as students and as people that have been trained up through education, it's our responsibility to try to provide that for other people. And we can't do that sitting in a classroom. We have to go out and actually do it.
How about others of you? Any of those kinds of reflections? We are dealing with very different levels of education here, from undergrad to master's to doctoral and now graduate work in the world. So please feel free to answer from where you're sitting.
I have something that's sort of the opposite in terms of I was kind of inspired actually by a somewhat more negative experience I had, and it was when I first got to Uganda a few years ago. I got there sort of accidentally, and I wanted to work for a solar company, so I went around and I found this company called Village Energy, and they have a great website. They talk so much about how they provide so much in rural areas, and so I interned with them for a few months initially, and they were mostly run by a guy who was an ex-Google employee. And what I came to realize is that this company had been a startup for 10 years. They won award after award. They sat on all these panels, and they had never made a profit. They did nothing. They just talked really well. They spoke like Silicon Valley people, and they did nothing, and it annoyed the hell out of me. And they were sucking up all of the air in the room doing this. And so that's when I was like, I need to work for Africans. I don't want to be working for next Google employee. I want to work for Africans.
Other answers to that question, if you've got them? If not, don't feel pressured.
So I think mine was very accidental as well. I consider myself very privileged to say I come from immigrant parents. That's taught me so much resilience in this world. And from my parents, they exposed me to a network of people that I honestly never questioned myself and my abilities and what I could attain in this world until I got to Michigan, a very completely different space than what I was raised in. So around me, I saw Black lawyers, doctors, engineers, policewomen, teachers. Every facet of life, I saw someone who looked like me in that. So my parents, what they did every summer, though like I do consider myself also fortunate that my parents never forced me to read textbooks like other friends of mine who had African parents, they gave us the opportunities to go to different summer programs. And so this particular summer program was a summer engineering program in 2003 at Southern University of Louisiana. And the program was called Summer Engineering Academy. And in this program, the first thing we did, we talked about solar energy and how we can harness energy from the sun and turn it into things we can use to cook, to clean, whatever you name it, you can do something with solar energy. And so since I was in 3rd grade, our project was to make a solar oven with a Pringles can. And I said, how the hell are we gonna do this? It's just a Pringles can. And from that summer on, I would say that that Pringles can and that at the end of the summer, I cooked a hot dog in it, from coating the outside in dark construction paper, aluminum foil, having a wire hanger go through the lid as like a spit to turn the hot dog. That one summer, those 4 weeks at that summer program has turned into a lifelong love of learning and exposure for me. And so for me, that was my pivotal moment to say education, learning, technology, that's something that I want to be a part of for the rest of my life. And so I can say from that program, I did other programs and more programs, and then choosing my major in college, because at first I wanted to do international affairs and all of this other stuff. And then I fell in love with chemistry and did chemistry. And now I'm here in Michigan doing engineering. And so I've kept evolving through time, but I can honestly say it goes back to that one summer trying to make a solar oven from a Pringles can.
So for me, growing up in India, the path of success was always, as I think Nancy mentioned earlier, engineering, doctor, lawyer. From my parents, it was actually engineering or doctor. So went down the engineering route. And for the longest time wanted to be working in robotics or something high tech, because that's cool and that's what sci-fi films are made out of. But then in the summer of 2015, just before I started my master's here in Michigan in 2016, I had a conversation with some friends and family who were doctors or studying to be doctors, and they were just lamenting the fact of the prices and the fact that nothing in medical devices was made in India. And this is like not that long ago, like 4-5 years ago. And so that set me down the route of just making medical devices in and for the location you're in. And that was the thing that's driven me, and that's where I am. I don't know where the future is going to take me, but hopefully exciting places.
On the road to those exciting places, though, I imagine that you've already had some experiences of major setbacks where you've had to take that velocity you got from the Pringles can or the realization or the company you realized you didn't want to work for, and reckon with how hard it is to get from where you are to where you want to be. And I wonder if we could then maybe work our way right back down, starting maybe with Lydia again, talking about a moment where you've had to deal with your own self, where you come from. Roland mentioned privilege earlier, and some of the ways that where you want to go means dealing with others in ways that help you get to know yourself too.
So when you mentioned that, the first thing that pops to mind is actually an incident that happened this summer while we were in Liberia. And So I arrived ahead of my team to set things up for them before they came, and I was going to all these different places where we're having networking dinner here. Okay, I'm going to secure this location, pay this deposit, go here, get this housing situation set up, and we went to a location where we were supposed to have the housing dinner, the networking dinner, and I talked to the manager. I walk in, talk to the manager. Manager takes me upstairs to go talk to the other manager, to talk to the cashier about paying the deposit, but we wanted to agree on terms first. So we're having this discussion, this business discussion, and granted, like, it was the summertime and it was a cafe, so I just came in t-shirt, some shorts, but they were like kind of longish shorts, but still appropriate enough for the weather. And I'm talking to this guy, and he's talking to me, and on the side, there's a woman that's saying, excuse me, you need to leave here. And I said, what do you mean? And she was like, you're not dressed to be here. And I said, I'm confused. I'm coming to pay a deposit. I'm coming to do business. There's no sign saying there's a dress code. It's a cafe, so you kind of come as you are. And she said, you need to leave. And I said, okay, that's fine. And so I ended my discussion with the gentleman. I walk out, and I let the manager know, this is unacceptable, because I'm pretty sure had I looked differently, she wouldn't have said that I needed to leave. And that pained me, because why is it that someone that looks like me is putting me down for what I'm wearing, but I'm over here trying to do something great for other people that look like me? And in that instance, I could have been mad and said, I'm not going back to this particular cafe to host this dinner. But we chose that particular cafe as a team because that was a business that was started up by youth in Liberia to help other youth in Liberia. And we wanted to spend our money in a place that's gonna keep generating that network of helping each other. So instead of getting mad at the situation, I said, no, I'll let management take care of it, and then we can come back to discuss later. And so that little instance could have been something that really brought me down. I could have been really mad. I could have been like, oh, I'm leaving Liberia and never coming back if they're gonna treat me like this. But I took it as a learning experience to say, no, you just have possibly never seen someone else that looked like you in this type of position. So I wanna be that inspiration for you next time, and I wanna take this as a learning experience to say, there are gonna be pitfalls sometimes. It might not always be from someone different from you. It might be from someone who looks like you, but you still just take it and keep going, because at the end of the day, you're trying to do good work.
So I think for me, when you mentioned that question, Rebecca, I think, so I spent a year in Kenya, and this was the first time I'd spent a long time in a country other than the US for the last 7 years. So I'd gotten fairly comfortable in the US, which is easy to do. And so I'd forgotten a lot of the challenges that come with working in countries like India or Kenya. And so I go in sort of wide-eyed, rosy-eyed, and then I hit the ground, and I'm like, oh, and then just everything starts hitting me. Like, the hospitals are not moving fast enough, or people are just being slow and they aren't being excited about it. I'm like, why are you not excited? And like, this is saving lives. Like, and then it just took a lot of time of just like Lydia said, just reflecting, calming, taking that step back to be like, no, there are certain customs and practices here that I need to understand and delve into to work with them rather than work against them or force my way onto it. And so that was a really, really important pitfall for me to have, because hopefully that means it doesn't have to happen again. So.
Excellent. I think a lot of us can relate to that story. And it's beautifully told. Any other setbacks that we?
Setbacks, it's kind of hard to say. Let's be honest, I'm a white American man who spends most of his time in Africa. Life is way easier than I deserve it to be, obscenely so. And I think really the main thing is, recognizing that I will never be at a point where I'm fully aware of everything that's going on around me, and being comfortable with that, and also realizing that there are things that I am still unlearning. There are times constantly, really, where people assume me to be an expert, or they assume me to be an investor just because I'm the white guy. And when I was in CAR, it was interesting because we would go, mostly our clients there were NGOs because they're the only people who have money in a lot of ways in CAR. And they would be doing installations in schools or in office buildings and whatnot. And when I would go with my Eritrean colleague, Kidane, he would get a much frostier reception. And when I would walk in, they would they would open the doors quite a bit wider for me. And trying to figure out how to use that for the good of this company was something that I'm still learning. And I mean, in terms of setbacks, really the only setback is when I'm trying to get on a trying to get on a motorcycle taxi, and they go by and they say like, make that man pay 10,000. And then I just have a good time arguing with him and using the 3 phrases I've got. So there's very few setbacks. It's mostly, I think, dealing a lot of the time, honestly, with Westerners who are very comfortable in their, bubbles of privilege in Kampala, which is very, very common, unfortunately, in Kampala. And I don't really know what the answer or solution is, except for continued education there and in institutions here in America. I'm just really grateful for how kind and understanding people have been to me on the continent.
So I want to interject into this conversation a little bit and talk a little bit about this white privilege. I experienced something very different because when I was in Liberia, people thought I was Lebanese, and that was pretty interesting. But as white...
But what are you?
I don't know. As white, I am Costa Rican. So when I spoke Spanish, they got really freaked out. As white females or males working with African partners, what have you learned from your African partners that you can use and you can tell us to help us guard against this white privilege, foreign privilege that we can use to shield them from our presence, right? Because sometimes we're there, we're trying to help them, and we end up being, a hindrance, right?
And that can go to any of you.
Yeah, any of you, really. But
yeah.
I think for me, it's just like being very open and like upfront with the fact that I really want to listen and learn, because especially when we were in Ghana, like I had never been there before. I didn't really know anything about what we were doing, and so just like asking people for help was a big thing for us. We had some really great people that were helping us, and I think just being like humble and not trying to appear that you know everything and letting people know that you don't know everything and that you need help was big for me.
I think, there's 2 things. I think one of them is genuinely making an effort to integrate. I'm always amazed at how the forces of Americanization and how in Africa you have these privileged foreign elites who just they don't learn a lot of the time, and they don't make an effort to learn the language and the culture and things like this. And so, even if it's just learning to say, Ogambachi Mukulu, just these kind of things. And then the other side of it, of course, is I've found myself many times where I'll be with, a Ugandan colleague or an Eritrean colleague, and people will be asking me the questions and just deferring, just being like, this is my colleague's thing, like constantly deferring to them. So I'd say it's a combination of those 2, like a real effort to learn what's going on. And also like making sure that when you can, you defer the attention and power and resources and assumption of knowledge to your African colleagues.
Lydia, I'm interested in what you think, because you're trying to bring attention to female leaders, which is a double whammy, right?
This conversation kind of makes me think of another incident that happened in Liberia. So there was a team of 7 of us that came from the University of Michigan. 4 of us were African American and 3 weren't, technically. So when we were in Liberia, I knew everyone's background in the team, and I never really tried to tell anyone else this is what this person is, this is what this person is. So when we met the students for the first time, they kind of gravitated more towards the white students or the white appearing students. And so then we played a game called 3 Truths and a Lie. And so I said something about like, oh, I have 10 siblings, I like this, and then I like this, and then they guessed the right one, and it was like, ha, 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 what's next? And so this one particular white appearing student from University of Michigan, she goes, I have a cat, I have a sister, and I'm African. And then they laughed and said, oh, you're African, that's the lie. And she says, no, I'm not, I'm Algerian. And then she's like, they're like, no, you're lying. And she was like, no, I'm 100% Algerian. Both of her parents are Berber. She speaks her local language. She speaks French, she speaks Arabic, and she says, I am African. And in that moment, you saw like a little switch flick in the students' eyes that they never considered that there could be other Africans that aren't necessarily dark. And then I also really appreciated the fact that she said that she was African, because I personally have never really experienced or encountered a lot of Northern Africans who consider themselves African. And so in that little moment of solidarity, she really brought a lot of us in the classroom closer together to acknowledge that, yes, she might not look like you, but I still am you. You can still be me. And so I think that's like, instead of looking at, or I hate to say, oh, let's not look at color, but it's an apparent thing. Like when I walk into a room, the first thing people are gonna see is that I'm a Black woman. First. They're not gonna know, oh, my parents are from Ghana. They're not gonna know my family history. They're not gonna know any of that. They're just gonna see a Black woman, and then they're gonna start making assumptions based on whatever encounters they've had with other Black people in life. But I think if we first lead with the fact that we are all people at the end of the day. We're gonna live and die, and we're still gonna bleed red. And the things where we have to do is die and pay taxes in some instance. So acknowledging that and then bonding over our humanity and the fact that I believe in life that we're called to serve. And so my purpose in what I do in life is to serve the people that I'm around. And so if we lead with some of those more humanistic approaches, it kind of helps curve some of this, because everyone's gonna love whatever's new and shiny, whether it's a white person, whether it's a Lebanese appearing Latino man. So, but just acknowledging that we're still people at the end of the day, and you and I, though we might look different, we're still the same.
So this leads me to one other question we had, although and I'll ask it and I'll let it sit for a minute while I also then perhaps collect a few questions from the audience, if you have them, right? And that has to do with the fact that what I love the layer cake that you all are offering us about identity and the complexity of identity in the kind of work that we're all here to do together today, which is to be change makers, right? And this weekend. And there's such a strong emphasis on change in every single talk I've heard. But nonetheless, it strikes me that you are also talking about some very stark power dynamics and asymmetries, which have to do with group identities. Why are women not learning as fast or as well as men in certain Ghanaian educational systems? How can we address that? Why are women in STEM underrepresented? And that's just gender, right? I can imagine also, for example, Tom's comments call to mind why Africans in general are being underrepresented or misrepresented where they are present in startup and tech economies in Africa. You know, these kinds of questions point to how complex and fluid identity can be, but also how stark it can feel to be a group that is excluded. So I wondered if the panelists could think a little bit about, you know, targets for support in the fields they are working in, biomedical, educational, solar energy, you know, and how that works. Who you feel are the most egregiously left behind in the sectors where you've had some work experience, and what you see as good strategies for addressing that from where you sit, both in terms of learning and in terms of doing things in the world. And while you're thinking about that, let me just see if there are any hands with other questions. Yeah.
I just wondered if you could talk about what you wish, or what would have been helpful for the institution, like in what ways could the institution have helped you or assisted you in preparing before you went and in the ongoing process of doing whatever you're doing? Because I know you're all at different stages and came to Michigan at different parts of your experience. But what kinds of institutional support would be helpful?
panel earlier comes to mind about closing the loop on learning and accompanying students. That's a great question. So that's two. I'm going to hold them in my head. I'm going to take a couple more. We'll collect them, and then we can throw it back open to our panelists. Emmanuel.
For me, I wanted to know the price of the blood transfusion device. And then if someone wanted it, for example, in Uganda, how would it be delivered?
That's a very concrete question. Oh, you had a question?
Right, I wanted to know, how did you get, this is two questions, how did you go from the idea to having it in several hospitals in Ghana? But my question to the panel is, as a U of M faculty member here, and a mother of people your age, who I know what you are talking about is so much the passion of my children as well. So the question becomes, what do we as faculty and as parents, what can we do to help make sure that people who have ideas like you but don't have that opportunity are heard? Does that make sense?
It does, and it seems to me to connect a little bit with the question behind you, although it's voiced in a more personal way. And so I think we should hang on to and maybe first answer these very concrete questions about the price of the device and how you scaled. And then we'll come back to the questions of both parental and faculty and institutional support and who's getting left out nonetheless despite all our efforts. Okay? How does that sound?
Yeah. So the Hemofuse has currently got regulatory clearance in Ghana and Kenya. In Uganda, it doesn't have regulatory clearance, but we can talk about how we can bring that in. And in terms of the price, so the Hemofuse can be used to salvage and give back to the patient multiple units of blood. And CISU Global Health is a for-profit company, so we're pricing it at the cost of 2 units of blood, and that changes a little bit across various geographies, but at least in Kenya, that's the model we are trying out right now.
Okay? Informational. Well,
So currently in Kenya, it costs $100 equivalent to process 1 unit of blood.
And how did you go from the idea to now having it marketed in and approved in Ghana and Kenya? I mean, I know that's a long process, but
Yes.
if you could summarize.
So the idea came out of a program that the inventors of this device that Dr. Sienko talked about, and then Julian Henker, who's our CTO, took that idea and along with some other colleagues from the original project, moved it forward through various iterations of ideation, I believe, if I'm not wrong, with Dr. Kaufman in Ghana as well. And then once the ideas were completed, there was a battery of testing that we did to prove that it's safe to use, that the blood is beneficial to the patient. And once that was done, we assembled like a packet of papers this big to submit to regulatory.
In those countries?
In those countries. Yes, in those countries. And then from there, found distributors or in the process of finding distributors and then on market. So that is a very, very condensed version. But yeah. Yeah, I believe so. I think Julian, and it was 2011 GHDI.
They were summer 2010 and they graduated in 2011.
Yep.
okay, so almost a decadal kind of life cycle from in your
No.
which is only to say that the intergenerational collaborative energy becomes very important if that's the life cycle of a single good idea. At its quickest, right? I mean, like that means it's really important for us to work across generations. And so to that end, let's come back to these bigger questions about how your elders, shall we say, parents, teachers, administrators, and others, as it were, can create institutional landscapes and learning landscapes that do a better and better job of making sure you're heard and encouraged to learn in the ways that you're bringing to us today. And I don't know who might have a response to that. Ready, Roland?
I can go. So I think for me, really emphasizing the need for experiential learning, because like I said before, like classrooms and like learning through reading textbooks and memorizing phrases and different things like that, they're important and they give you a good foundation of knowledge. But to really take that knowledge to the next step and create innovative initiatives and different things like that. Students really need to be given the opportunities to take the knowledge that they do have and like experiment with it, to be willing to make mistakes and just have like spaces open up for them where they can actually like try new things. So that might mean like going on a trip to a different part of the world, which can be really expensive, or it could just mean doing certain projects or different things that really allow kids to innovate, because students have lots of great ideas, as we kind of all know, and a lot of times those kind of get bogged down by all these other responsibilities they do have. So I think really focusing on allowing students to imagine and dream and like kind of pursue those things it's a good way to start that.
Actually, the platform that Roland and Madeline are using for their case study, which is designed to work on cell phones and to have easy translation, was created by kind of white hat hackers who were undergrad computer science students. And when I hired them to build that platform, I got a lot of pushback from my school. They were like, these kids can't do that. You need to hire a professional company. We got to be able to charge for these cases. And it was these undergrads who said to me, you don't want to charge. You want an open access tool with low barrier to use. This is sustainability we're talking about, right? And if I hadn't listened to those students, I think we wouldn't have had nearly the innovative platform that was just what you guys needed to close that loop. So I just want to second your thought.
Yeah, thank you to those students.
Yes, and they thank you for using it and taking it out into the world. It's a virtuous cycle. Other responses to this question of institutional and sort of elder support as you move through the world and learn and make change?
This is something that's kind of been on my heart since I started graduate school. Part of me believes that when you speak of how can the institution of Michigan support us, if you look around in this room, there's not that many U of M faculty here. There's not enough faculty even in the room present to make a quorum to vote for a tenure track position. And the way I look at it sometimes is that, in my opinion, you have to wait for people to die out, because the way tenure works, I can't just fire you. So I literally have to wait for you to die. And some people, we have a bunch of emeritus faculty in my department. Why are you taking that space for, like, let someone else come in? But then at the same time, you have to remember that it's almost like a buddy system. So I'm gonna bring my buddy who's gonna bring their buddy, and then all of the buddies look the same, think the same, dress the same. And that's a problem. And then you have young people trying to change it and shake it up, and they're just like, oh, you just don't know anything, be quiet. How? You too were once a young child with young ideas that wanted to go somewhere, and then you got somewhere. And so it's like, you have to remember at the end of the day, I always think of like Sankofa, like you have to go back and bring people up with you. But then being strategic about how you bring people with you. You can't have everyone that looks the same, thinks the same, acts the same. You're not gonna have any change. And so I think for an institution like Michigan, earlier you guys talked about endowing the UMAPS program. Having some type of thing like that would show me that Michigan truly cares, because allocating $1 million for 10 years, when you really break it down from overhead fees to, it doesn't stretch that long. But endowing a program that says we are going to put our money where our mouth is and fund these things for a generation, a lifespan, future generations. That's how I see that an institution like Michigan cares. And then going back to saying, how do you as parents and faculty, how can you show your support? Just by being there sometimes, because while in graduate school, I changed advisors. It wasn't necessarily because I didn't think I was capable, but I had a bad advisor. He wasn't acting as a mentor towards me. I didn't feel as if he was invested in my success. And that's what you have to look at in the day. Who's gonna be invested in your success? Because when I wrote my grant applications, I wasn't saying, you talked about how you're not the future, you're the present. And for my graduate applications, I kind of said, I don't have nothing for you right now, so you're investing in my future potential. But just bringing that back to the present, it's just like, how could I even think about that when I wrote my application? Well, because I had people who were standing there in that present moment who were invested in me, who were giving me the support, whether it was my parents, whether it was my friends, whether it was different faculty and teachers I encountered growing up and matriculating through school, or the kindness that I saw in a stranger helping someone else walking down the street. I saw instances that there is still goodness in the world and there's people that care. And so having somebody show up, even if you can't put in money, if you can't put in time, just showing up sometimes is what really matters at the end of the day. And then to speak on the thing about cost, I'm a big proponent of there's money everywhere. You just gotta find it and be strategic on who you're asking for the money. I come from a really strong mother who's always told me to go after what I wanted, and I negotiated my grad school package. How many of you guys can say you did that? But it's just to say that, like, if closed mouths don't get fed, you have to ask for what you want and then also look for those pools of money available. And so if it's just $50 from 10 people, it might seem like a little bit, but $50 from 10 people can turn into $50 from 100 people, and that money just keeps multiplying. So go after as many pools as possible. Get other people to also invest in you. People like things they can relate to, so sell yourself.
Man, we just stepped into a political mud pie here, and
May I do a
bravo.
very quick follow-up?
Yes, yes.
So I have a request of you all. Let your institution know what you value, because the system here is so difficult to change. The institution is so used to doing promotions and tenures and this on things that are easy to look at. What you're asking for is something unique that the Michigan says it wants. So you need to hold your administrators. You need to say, this is more of what we want. They will listen to you because you're the people paying the tuition, right? So I'm giving you the assignment to go and use your student voices in your organizations to make what you want known. Okay?
You're asking
Your
for the
assignment.
Michigan. You're asking for the Michigan difference, right? For them.
Can I
Yes,
just-
please.
How do we do that? No, like seriously.
That's a great question. I wanted to interject in here because I wanted to ask you guys, and Ophelia, I kind of disagree with you. I think, I'm sorry. Ovita. My apologies. I kind of disagree with you. Full disclosure, I'm non-tenure track, so I don't have a dog in the fight. That means there's one less vote for the tenure vote as well. So, however, what I want to know, and this is something that I struggle with, I'm non-tenure, yet I get reviewed every year by the tenure committee, which makes no sense coming from industry to me, but that's okay. What do you want your professors to be graded on? What do you want us to be graded on? And I think if you put that up in a package and you find a bunch of professors, you can see the allies that you have here in the room. I think everybody in here is an ally. How do we take that up to administration? And I think we need to continue to be allies even in that fight.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I just
All of a sudden he's like, it's a lot easier to go to Ghana and fix these problems than to talk about academia here.
Yeah, because I've had some really amazing professors, and I've also had some really terrible professors in my time here. And I think a lot of that just really comes down to whether you feel like, Lydia talked about it, whether you feel like the professor is invested in your success and is invested in you actually learning. I think a lot of the times some professors, unfortunately, are just pushing their own agenda, whether that is having you buy their book or just like kind of like you can be in a lecture and feel like someone's feeding you something that they made up 10 years ago and they're just like shoving it down your throat, literally, like where they've made slides from years and years ago. So I feel like some professors really need to be challenged to continue to innovate and not only teach but actually learn. So providing opportunities for students who have a lot more present experience in certain things to also be able to engage with the professors. I don't think there's a lot of spaces where professors are always listening to their students, especially when there's 300 in one class. That's another issue. But I think that would be really beneficial if it felt like there was cross dialogue between, like, from the student to the professor and from the professor to the student, outside of just like some course evaluation that we only end up doing because it gives us an extra point on participation.
These are hard systems to change. And I can see that each of you is already making a lot of contributions to the kinds of tools that help us better facilitate peer learning of the kind that you're doing from each other right now and with us. But it's a long journey. It's a really long journey. And I do want to touch back briefly on this question of whether, with all of it in motion, you know, and all that you're learning on the go, whether there are still groups or social categories that are getting left out in ways that worry you as the whole machine moves forward, trying to self-correct for biases and exclusionary policies in education and just disappointing pedagogy. Okay, there's all that out there. We're all working together on that stuff. But is there any, in the work you're doing, do you see any really glaring further needs to think about a certain social category of actors or group of people that we need to be mindful of in this room with our agendas about sustainability, STEM, and the connections between the imperfect experiment of the United States of America and the emerging experiments of so many Africas? What would you leave us with in this last few minutes of the panel in terms of what you're learning about who's stepping up and who needs to be included, radically included, in the work that we do?
I'm going to take that question a little bit differently.
Please do.
Having been in Kenya and trying to sell this device, this is actually a really interesting question that we've been trying to tackle. We don't want to be the ones just trying to sell in Kenya for a variety of reasons. It's not scalable, it's not sustainable, it doesn't help anyone there except patients, and which is bottom line. But so the question we're thinking about is, who are we leaving behind to continue this on? Because that's how we make it sustainable. That's how we make a difference, I think. But anyways, and how and in what state? Like, we don't want to give them this device and then have them figure it out. No, we want to ensure that the systems are in place, that there is training, that there's maintenance, and that all those small logistical pieces that need to be put in place are put in place, and that wherever we go, that the ecosystem is built up, that if one small piece is removed, it's robust and it's redundant and can support itself so that we don't have to be. Because I think, as Roland mentioned, we're in a state of extreme privilege out here, even on this panel. And it's important to recognize and understand and work with that.
But there's a way in which your answer suggests that working professionals and continuing education of people already active in medical sectors and policy and is a glaring need in addition to any kind of marginalized group, right? If the system is to change. And that's a really interesting point, actually, and one that I will be really thankful for your having raised, because it's good to think with. Any other answers to that question?
In my field specifically, I think who's missing from the table is Black women. We had a town hall a couple years ago, and at the time there were 3 Black women in my department. They accepted 1 each year, so I am the last. I was accepted in fall 2015. And this particular town hall, we asked our graduate chair, what's the department doing to diversify? And he responded, we have a lot more women in the department. That's not really, yes, women are needed. But if all of the women also look like all of the men, what purpose are you serving? That's not diversity. That's still one type of people. It's just 2 different sexes. So I think it's important to remember that in a space like where I am, I didn't know any Black material science PhD students growing up. I didn't. I found out about material science because when I was an undergrad, my mentor, who was another student who I actually went to a math and science boarding high school with in Louisiana, she also went to my university, and she said she was going to do material science. And I said, what is that? And she told me about it, and I said, that's what I'm doing next. So I had to see someone else that I knew do it for me to then go on and find out about it too. And so I think that's really important in having other people in the room be there. And then the other side, like I say that because there's a wonderful quote that I really live by that says, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. If you educate a woman, you educate a nation. That's because that one woman can give birth to countless other people. And so I know I really revere my mother, and you guys probably do too. I'm going to listen to my mother. A lot of the things I live my life by are just things my mom said growing up. Common sense is not common. Cleanliness is next to God. And all these other phrases, like I live by them. I breathe them. They help me do my dishes at night. So it's like having another Black woman there, not just to say solidarity from being Black, but her experiences are different. Her experiences are also going to be different from my experiences. And I think too, like that would help with selling your product in Kenya or where else, educating the women in different villages or communities about what your project is and the need for it. Because in America, we advertise to the consumer. Personally, I don't think we should be advertising pharmaceuticals to consumers, but in that context to where if you're in a place where you don't know about something, I know if I was someone growing up in a village that this man told me he's gonna take dirty blood from my stomach, pump it out and put it back into me, I would be very leery of that. But if you were to educate these women about what it's actually doing, how it's really going to be beneficial towards their health and drive down other costs or whatever it might help, that's not going to just help you sell your product, but that's also going to help the other people in that community learn about healthcare outcomes, and also bridging the gap between them and their doctor as knowledge and taking a active role in their healthcare instead of just taking, they're also participating. So that's my little 2 cents. Black women are missing from the table.
Nicely argued. Any other final perspectives? We're coming towards the end, and I know that there's both a poster prize award to happen momentarily and a reception for all of us who've been such great citizens of this conference today. So I do want to give our panelists who haven't just spoken a last word. If you have one about radical inclusion and the path forward for you, whatever that may mean, if you have a few words to add, Madeline, Roland, or Tom.
I would just add really quickly, I mean, I agree with everything that Lydia is saying, and I would say that it expands to every sector. And I think where I saw this missing a lot was in the business sector in Uganda, and it's about ownership as well. You know, like when you look at solar companies operating not just in Uganda, but across the continent, they're a vast majority owned by European companies. The solar panels themselves are Chinese, because what isn't at this point? And the CEOs are all men, and this is a huge problem. And I think that African ownership is extremely important. Extremely important. I think that all of these great ideas can get so much money here in the U.S. and they're sent to the continent. And they work for 2 or 3 years, and then they get tired and they say, "Okay, I've added something to my CV," and they move back, and it doesn't continue. And I think it's really important just to support and invest in African, especially African female entrepreneurs on the continent. And I think that that's a really important step in moving forward.
Yeah, and the final thing I'll say is I really think that focusing on the education of girls is just so important, and is really something that is underappreciated. Just from what I've seen with being part of 5 North and being in Ghana and working with students and the different communities that we're in, there weren't nearly enough girls in school. There weren't nearly enough girls in positions of leadership. And a lot of those things are due to different biases and cultural practices, and all those things are understandable. But I think when it comes down to it, there really needs to be more of an emphasis on allowing a seat at the table for a group of people who are more than half of the population of the world. Like the fact that women are more than they're women and men, clearly. So if it comes down to it, one population shouldn't be the only population that are making decisions and are moving the world forward. We need to make spaces for women.
I want to thank all of these panelists. Madeline, do you have a final thought? Okay. He summed it up for the two of you with your amazing work, starting at the beginning and moving all the way through these chains of learning and knowledge. These guys have really shared from the heart with us today. They've changed the tone of the conversation, I think, toward where we began with remembering Moses, and lives lived very, very honestly in trying to make change. I want to thank all of you for stepping up and sharing with us today. And now is the moment when from behind the curtain will step the secret judges who've deemed the best posters. I want to introduce our fabulous 3. It's Dan, and you know Dan. It's also Kathleen Cienko and Paul Kimara. These guys have together deliberated and discussed and chosen the very best of the best for the posters. I will cede the podium to you all, and you can tell us what you've decided.
Thank you. Well, first we'll do the undergraduates and the graduates, and we've got a winner in both categories, but we also have some honorable mentions, so we'll mention them honorably first. So in the undergraduate category, honorable mention goes to Mesher, a device for blood loss measurement following vaginal childbirth in low-resource settings. And Chun-Hei So, I should have my glasses on for this, Kalini and Yvonne Wu were the poster children. I hope some of you are still around. We don't know. And the undergraduate winner was low-cost detection of counterfeit anti-malarial drugs using ultraviolet spectrometry, a cell phone mounted app. And it's Sujai Atakali was the presenter here. And I will say, we can make some comments. It was a well-focused need, a usable device. It had high accuracy, though he could have used more detail, more data on his poster. And it had an aspect of scaling, marketing, and actually a business model. It had actually already started to be potentially a company. So we thank you.
Thank you so much.
Don't run away too far, because we'll want to take photographs after this. Okay, now for the graduate students, we had two honorable mentions, as I said. The first one was mapping memories of District 6, an interdisciplinary approach. This is a very interesting thing about art. If you haven't seen this, it's still in the back. Archiving the recollections of people in South Africa who had lived through the apartheid period and mapping out where they were compared to contemporary meaning during apartheid maps. And the presenters, actually I think all four were there, were Jessica Yelk, Valen Dahl, Vincent Chu, and Vanessa Cox. Any? And another honorable mention among the graduate students is reconstructing and forecasting the water balance of Lake Chilwa in Malawi. And that was presented by Zhao Chen and many other people, but I think Zhao was in particular, he was very impressive as somebody who could speak on his feet about the project. And then finally, the winner amongst the graduate student posters was Management Generates a Landscape of Behavioral Trade-Offs Influencing Space Use of Critically Endangered Lions in West Africa. And Kitty Mills, along with many other people, but she was the presenter, gave a very good presentation. And the reason we chose it really was there were very good partnerships in the project. It left training and technology behind in the host country when they were finished their project. And it was relevant to local economic opportunities and was very well integrated with government agencies responsible for that sort of thing in terms of tourism for large game parks and things like this. And the poster in particular itself was sort of complete and had very nice progression from soup to nuts, as one would say. So, is anybody around from that group? See that? Yeah. Okay, well, I guess that's all we have to do as far as announcements are concerned, and the rest is just photo ops. What?
Thank everybody.
We should thank everybody who graced us with a poster, and for all their efforts, we're very grateful.